Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei become the demonic vampire? If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Loner. That was the word that described the young man known as Issei Haidu. He was a quiet and serious young man, preferring to distance himself from others. He relied on no one but himself, not wanting to depend on others. He never had the desire to get close to anyone, with the exception of his parents. Although Issei wasn't a complete loner. His two friends Mitsuda and Motohama, better known as the perverted duo, made sure to prove that. Issei could never recall how he had ever become friends with the two, but deep down he thought of them as brothers, although their excessive pervertedness annoyed the hell out of him. The doors of Kuo Academy shot open, the students excitedly running out of the school. Seconds later, Issei walked out of the doors and roughly threw his two friends onto the ground. He scoffed when he heard the perverted duo moaning in pain. "You two are idiots. If you'd stop trying to peek into the kendo club, both of you wouldn't be whining in pain." He placed his hands in his blazer pockets and scowled. Mitsuda quickly got up and glared at his clearly annoyed friend. "Hey. You're just jealous because Motohama and I are able to sneak some peeks at the girls. It's so worth the pain." Issei stared at him blankly. "I rest my case." He sighed and walked away, leaving the two perverts behind. He shook his head. "Idiots." Above the school, a young woman with an ample bosom appeared at the window. She had crimson blood-red hair and blue-green eyes, staring at the departing Issei with an unreadable expression. As he started his pathway home, Issei looked up at the descending sun. He sighed and continued his walk until he heard a soft voice. Excuse me?" He stopped his pace and turned around. A girl around his age was nervously looking at him. She had black hair and violet eyes and was clad in a dark red jacket with a letter P sewed in gold, a white undershirt, a red bow, and a green skirt with a thin white strip around the lower end of it. Issei stood silently, waiting for the girl to speak. Are you Issei Haidu?" Issei stared back at her quietly, appearing to make the girl more frantic. "Yeah. Who's asking?" The girl looked taken aback at the cold tone of his voice. My name is Yuma Mono. I've seen you walk across this bridge many times before and that's when I've always wanted to ask you." As she stuttered her words, a blush tinted her face. Issei narrowed his eyes at the blush that appeared on Yuma's face. "That blush, it's completely fake. She actually believes that pretending to be shy is going to swoon me over. How sickening. HMPH. But I'll humor her." "Ask me what?" The blush on Yuma's face increased, much to Issei's annoyance, and her words stuttered even more. Would you please go out with me?" There was absolute silence until it was broken bluntly by Issei himself. "No." Yuma looked up in shock. Issei shot her a look of cold indifference. "As far as I'm concerned, you don't know me at all. And I'm sure we've never once met one another before. No one just asks someone on a date out of the blue, just like that." He narrowed his eyes and he walked away from the shell-shocked Yuma. As soon as he was gone, Yuma's surprised expression morphed into utter rage. "How dare he? That stupid brat." She huffed in annoyance, stomping the way back to her location. "I was nearly giving myself to him and he flat out refused me. What kind of guy does that?" Issei's house. Issei opened the door to his house and went inside. He immediately went upstairs to his room and closed his door. Tired from the day, he laid upon his bed and closed his eyes, resting for a nap. Next day. Issei walked out of the doors of Kuo Academy and looked to see Mitsuda and Motohama looking up towards a window. His interest piqued, he walked over to his friends. "What are you two doing?" Perfect timing answered his question when a crimson-haired young woman appeared out of the window. Issei looked up at the girl and he rose an eyebrow as the girl appeared to be staring down at Issei and her lips curved upwards into a warm smile. Issei appeared indifferent at the motion he was receiving and looked to his friends. "Who is that girl?" Mitsuda gave his friend a look of disbelief. "You haven't heard?" He then smirked. "That's Ria's Gremory, the #1 beauty of Kuo Academy." Motohama smirked alongside Mitsuda. "She's also one of the great ladies." Issei stared at his friend and looked at the #1 beauty. HMPH. How about that? His watch beeped, signaling his departure. Issei turned to the perverted duo. "I'll see you guys later." He walked away from them and continued his pathway. Issei had a calm look on his face as he entered the park. The park was one of the few places he could relax and meditate at. He searched for a nearby bench and sat on it, closing his eyes. A peaceful expression came over his face. He ended up meditating for a few hours until he was interrupted by a voice. Issei." Issei opened his eyes that instantly narrowed at the sight. He stood up from the bench and looked at the person of the voice. It was Yuma Mono. "What is she doing here?" Yuma had a look of uneasiness on her face. I wanted to apologize about yesterday. But I do want to ask you something else. If I may. Issei stared at her with indifferent eyes. If it will make her leave, then I have no choice. He sighed. What is it? Yuma's shy and innocent look distorted into an evil expression as her sweet voice lowered to a seductive yet dark deeper voice. Would you die for me? Her clothing shredded as she transformed into another form. She grew taller, taking on a more mature appearance, and her eyes changed to a more darker look. On her back appeared to be two black wings. Her clothing consisted of black strap-like objects around and under her breasts, a thong-like piece held around her hips by three thin straps, gloves that run right up her arms with small lengths of chains hanging from them, shoulder guard-like objects on her shoulders, with three large spikes sprouting from her right shoulder, and black thigh-high heel boots. Issei had no time to think about her question and her transformation as he was suddenly stabbed by a glowing spear through his torso. He put his hand to the spear, but it disappeared. There was a hole through his chest, and he gasped sharply in pain. Vast amounts of blood spurted out of his mouth as Issei collapsed on the ground. The pain he felt was absolutely immense. It was too much for him to bear. He looked at his hand covered with his own blood. Yuma smirked down at him. What a shame. You were a threat to us, so we had to get rid of you early on. If you want to hold a grudge, then despise the god who put the sacred gear inside you. Issei coughed out blood as he tried to catch her words. Sacred what? Yuma chuckled cruelly. Well, goodbye. She flew away, leaving Issei in pain on the ground. Issei shakily lifted his hand up and he tightened it into a fist. Damn. I can't go yet. Not now. Not like this. He suddenly heard a deep voice chuckle darkly. Is that so? The blood from pouring under Issei started to move, taking a shape and form. The blood formed into a shape of a tall man. The man had black hair with blood-red eyes and was clad in a charcoal suit, white gloves with seal-like symbols on them, leather riding boots, and an intricately knotted red cravat, covered by a full-length red frock overcoat with a cape. He also wore a red fedora hat with a wide, floppy brim, and a pair of circular, heavily tinted, wire-framed orange sunglasses with goggle sidings. The trait that slightly freaked out Issei was the sadistic smirk on the man's face. Who are you? The man smirked widely, revealing sharp canines. Descendant. Alucard. What on earth was the man talking about? Alucard continued to smirk down at Issei. Issei coughed up more blood as he winced in pain. The amount of blood pouring from him was causing him to lose consciousness. Alucard chuckled. Do you want to die, Issei Haidu? As he struggled to go through the pain, Issei gritted his teeth as he desperately pondered. No, I don't want to die. Not yet. I absolutely cannot die. Not now. Catching what was seemingly his last breath, he uttered. No. The last thing Issei saw before slowly closing his eyes was Alucard's smirk widening, revealing his frighteningly sharp teeth. Darkness overcame Issei's sight and there was nothingness. Deep. Deep. Issei's eyes shot open, gasping as he sat up. His eyes were wide open with shock as he breathed heavily in and out. He looked around to see he was back in his room. He looked around more to find the source of the noise and found it was his alarm clock. He reached over and turned it off. Sighing, Issei looked in front of him. Was it all a dream? What do you think? Issei jumped in shock as heard the voice. What? The voice chuckled darkly and an amorphous mass of darkness appeared on the floor. The darkness formed into the shape of a tall man. Issei's eyes widened in shock and slight fear. You? Alucard smirked in amusement and he snickered. Yes, it is me. Issei looked down. So it wasn't a dream. I almost died. He looked up at Alucard. And you saved me. He closed his eyes. Thank you. His response was a snorted chuckle from Alucard. Issei gained a thoughtful expression. But then how am I still alive? Alucard smirked and lowered his head. You, my descendant, are now a vampire. There was an absolute tense silence. It was broken by Issei running to his bathroom and looking frantically into the mirror. His eyes widened at his altered appearance. His light brown hair had transformed into a deep black color and his usual stern but slightly warm brown eyes were now a blood red hue. His hair and eyes were not the only things that had changed. As Issei looked into the mirror more closely, he could that his physique was more muscle-toned and he had grown taller, not as tall as Alucard, but at the height where the red cravat laid on Alucard's chest. Issei stared in disbelief. I don't believe it. He heard Alucard's chuckle from his room. Believe it, Issei. Issei turned around to see his ancestor smirking at him. What exactly did you do? Alucard chuckled. As I said before, I've converted you into a vampire. You were listening, weren't you? Issei gave him an expression that he wasn't in the mood to play around, so Alucard became a bit serious, smirking all the while though. I merge my blood, consciousness, and my power with your soul, converting you into a vampire, or rather in your case, a hybrid vampire. Issei looked at him for a moment away and then looked away. A hybrid, huh? So I'm still human. That's a relief. Correct. Fortunately, you do not virtually possess the weaknesses of a traditional vampire. Issei placed a hand under his chin and thought. So the sun is harmless to me. And you do not have to depend on blood for consumption. Issei sighed in relief, but then he sent Alucard a questioning glance. Hold on. You said you merged with my soul. So ultimately, our souls are combined. Why are you still here? Alucard smirked. That is a topic of which I will tell you another time. Issei stared at him for a minute but then sighed as he let it go. I just can't believe it. Alucard chuckled. As a vampire hybrid, there will be a time when you need to control your abilities. And that time shall be later on. Issei nodded. For now, I will tell you what abilities you possess. Listen well, because I will not feel inclined to repeat it. Issei took on a serious expression and walked over to his bed. All right. I'm listening. As Alucard began to explain the powers and attributes, Issei continued to listen with growing amazement. Your strength had augmented to the point that it far surpasses that of a normal human. And your speed and reflexes are amplified as well. Regeneration is also a common ability of vampires, as well as the manipulation of shadows. And the list goes on and on. Issei stared wide-eyed at Alucard as the vampire continued his explanation. After the description of his powers, Issei turned to Alucard. So, when am I going to learn how to control my powers? I will let you know in due time. Until then, hone your body physically so you are able to get used to it. Issei looked down in thought and looked up again. All right. A few moments of silence came next. Then Issei spoke. So what are you gonna do until then? Alucard smirked. I will remain by your side to observe you while you practice getting used to your new body. His smirk grew as he teased Issei. And if I ever get tired of standing, I'll simply recede into your subconscious and rest. Issei stared blankly at his ancestor and crossed his arms. Ye. He looked up and nodded to Alucard. All right. I'll do my best. 2 weeks later. Issei barely dodged another bullet from Alucard's jackal. Recovering, a shadow formed behind Issei and the formless mask grabbed him by the arm. But before Alucard could damage Issei at all, Issei suddenly dissolved into a pool of shadows and appeared behind Alucard, rushing across the ground and then balancing himself. Alucard grinned with insane glee as he shot more rounds from the jackal, with Issei dodging every bullet. Then Issei pulled out a gun of his own, rivaling in size and appearance of the jackal. A crimson aura formed around his body as his power flowed through him. He pressed the trigger, but instead of bullets, the gun released a barrage of ruby-colored energy beams. Alucard smirked as he teleported. When he turned around, he was caught off guard when he found out the beams were following him. His surprised expression morphed into a psychotic grin. Excellent. He's learned well. While gliding, he pressed the trigger on his jackal, forcing Issei to evade the bullets and hopefully break his concentration. But, much to Alucard's amusement and pride, Issei evaded them all successfully and still concentrated on attacking Alucard with the energy beams. Yes, he has definitely improved. His strength has increased many times over and his reflexes are in tune with his reaction time. 2 hours later. Issei was laying on his bed with his arms folded. He sighed. The day was brutal. Well, brutal would be an understatement. Over the last 2 weeks up until now, he had been training with Alucard on how to hone his body and his vampiric abilities. He had managed to impress Alucard and gain his respect. Their relationship had evolved to a combination of a student-mentor bond to a rarely but surely unique friendship. Despite the fact that Issei was more or less a loner and that Alucard himself wasn't exactly close to being the definition of social, they strangely made it work. When outside of training, Issei would usually go on with his life while Alucard merely rested in Issei's subconscious. The only time Alucard came out was when it was time to train Issei or the occasional habit of teasing and messing with Issei to death. Yes, what a unique bond it was. Hey. He heard a grunt from his head. Issei couldn't help but chuckle. So is this how it's going to be from now on? Just us training? He heard a snort of amusement from the vampire. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that you didn't have a social life to begin with. It's not like you have anything else to do. Issei made a blank face. He then remembered something. You know you still didn't apologize for shooting me in the head like that. He heard Alucard laugh in amusement. Whatever made you think I was going to? You regenerated, didn't you? Issei rolled his eyes. Dude, not cool. He got a hearty laugh in response and he closed the mind link between him and the vampire. He positioned himself comfortably on his bed and let himself a well-deserved sleep. Next day at Kuo Academy. Issei sat silently under one of the trees in the schoolyard as he observed the students walking around. When he had come back to Kuo Academy, the students were surprised to see Issei's new appearance, especially with some of the girls showing some attraction towards him, much to Issei's nervousness. Alucard's constant teasing didn't make the situation any better. As he surveyed the area, he heard two gales of laughter from the bushes behind the windows of the kendo club. Issei narrowed his eyes as he immediately knew who it was. Itsuda and Motohama. I swear they really have to quit. Why do you even bother? Issei looked to his right to see Alucard standing full height near the tree Issei was sitting at. Issei was the only one who could see Alucard, much to the relief of the both of them, so Alucard was invisible to the humans. Let those fools learn their own mistakes. Issei sighed and turned to look at his friends. That's the problem. They never do. It annoys the hell out of me when they do this. Alucard stared for a moment at his descendant's two friends before a dark smirk split his face. Issei noticed this and immediately paled. What are you going to do? The No-Life King didn't respond and disappeared into a flurry of shadows. Issei sighed until he heard the vampire's voice. Watch this. And so Issei reluctantly watched, secretly hoping that Alucard wouldn't hurt his friends. But Suda and Motohama were giggling perversely as they watched the girls undressing through the kendo club window. The boys were so engrossed into looking through the window that they failed to notice Alucard appearing behind them. The vampire's smirk widened when he picked up the suddenly surprised pair and threw them through the window. The reaction was immediate. The girls screamed in indignation and, you guessed it, attacked the perverted duo. Issei snorted and laughed out loud. He felt slightly sorry for his friends but couldn't control his laughter at their misfortune. To his surprise, Alucard was laughing his ass off. Hey, if he didn't feel like killing anything and if he was exceptionally bored, he could always just troll the hell out of someone. But sadly, Issei's and Alucard's mutual amusement at the former's friends had quickly ended as the perverted duo had called out for their savior. Their savior being Issei. And so Issei reluctantly went to the kendo club to save the two perverts. The girls in the kendo club blushed when Issei walked in, immediately forgetting the presence of the perverted duo. None too gently, Issei picked up his two friends by the collar, walked out of the kendo club and pinned them against the walls of the school. Okay, guys. This has gone on far enough. You've got to stop this. Itsuda glared. No way, man. And besides, we got caught because we somehow got thrown through the kendo club windows. Motohama put in his 2 cents, in vain mind you. It wasn't our fault this time. Issei could hear Alucard laughing in his mind but ignored it and narrowed his eyes anyway. That's not the point. It was your fault. You shouldn't have been behind the bushes spying on the girls in the first place. I'm telling you guys, this is the last time I'm going to save both of your asses. Itsuda waved his hand in dismissal. Oh, you don't mean that, Issei. Issei's eyes glowed bright crimson and he released a vast surge of Kai that paralyzed and shocked the perverted duo. He then said in a cold voice. I'm telling you guys for the last time. If this happens again, don't expect me to come save you. He dropped them on the ground, causing them to rub their posteriors in pain. Issei shook his head in annoyance. As he walked off, 2 sets of eyes peered down at him from the rooftops of the building. One of the eyes belonged to Ria's Gremory, while the other pair belonged to a well-endowed beauty with black hair and violet eyes, dressed in the same attire as Ria's. The black-haired girl giggled in amusement. Ara. That was interesting. Ria stared at the departing Issei. His appearance is definitely different from the last time I saw him, which was 2 weeks ago. What on earth happened to him? The energy he released. It certainly wasn't human. Far from it. What are you Issei Haidu? She turned to look at her friend, who had a blush on her face and was giggling. Ria's rose an eyebrow, but then she smirked. Of course Akeno would be excited at the sight of someone getting frightened. She walked away, leaving Akeno to stare at the walking Issei. As he walked home, Issei couldn't shake the feeling that someone was staring at him. He paused in his pace for a moment and then he shrugged. He shook the thought and feeling away and departed to his pathway to getting home. As he was walking, Issei looked to his right and saw a clothing store. He hummed in interest as something had caught his eye. At the store display laid a long black trench coat with shoulder pads and a raised studded collar. Issei checked his pockets and pulled out his wallet. He sighed in relief. For a second there, I thought I had left my wallet at home. He went inside the store and walked over to the cashier. Excuse me? The cashier looked up at Issei. Issei pointed to the black coat that had caught his eye. How much is that coat? The cashier looked over at the coat. That's gonna be $320. $75 with tax. Issei's eyes widened and he smiled. Really? That's it? What luck. He ran over to the trench coat, picked it up and took out his money. After paying for the coat, Issei contentedly strolled out of the store. In only a few minutes did he make it home and he went inside. Going up to his room, he closed his door, placing his new trench coat in his closet. As he looked inside of the coat, he smiled. There's so many pockets. I could easily carry my guns in there. Issei. Issei blinked. Yeah. There is something I must discuss with you. Issei stood still for a moment and then he nodded. Alright. Just let me get set up first. Closing the door to his closet, Issei walked over to his bed, sat upon it, and closed his eyes. Within Issei's subconscious. In his descendant subconscious sat Alucard in a throne-like chair. The no-life king held a contemplative look in his eyes. Earlier on, before Issei had started on his way home, the vampire had sensed two demonic auras nearby. They didn't appear to be threatening at all towards Issei, but it did pique Alucard's curiosity. Alucard had held back from telling Issei about the auras, watching to see if Issei could feel them. He had noticed that Issei had paused in his pace and looked around. But then Issei had shrugged, giving Alucard the indication that Issei had not completely sensed it. Which means his senses haven't improved as of yet. We'll have to change that. His musing was cut off as Issei appeared in front of him. The hybrid vampire opened his eyes and nodded to the elder vampire. What did you want to talk about? Alucard got comfortable in his throne. Earlier today, when you were about to depart from your educational institution, did you sense something abnormal? Issei looked down and he adopted a thoughtful expression. Now that you mention it, I had the feeling that someone was watching me from behind. But I had assumed it was nothing and let it go. He looked back up at Alucard. And from what I can tell, you noticed it as well. Otherwise you wouldn't have contacted me if you didn't. So I wasn't just imagining things. HMPH. Indeed. He paused for a minute. Obviously you can sense me, since I have merged with you. So there shouldn't be any reason you could never sense my presence, unless I chose to conceal myself. Issei nodded. Yeah. That makes sense. Which brings me to my next point. You need to sharpen your senses. Issei's eyes widened. Or more specifically, your ability to sense the supernatural. You have already honed your strength and speed capabilities. Your reflexes and ammunition reflexes have improved as well. You have been relying on your original human senses for too much. It is time for you to use your supernatural senses to its fullest extent. Issei looked to the side, crossed his arms, and his eyes widened in realization. Meditation. Alucard rose an eyebrow, prompting Issei to elaborate. During my free time, or whenever I needed to get away from annoyances, I went to the park to clear my mind. So meditation could work. Alucard smirked in amusement. Perhaps. Issei looked up at him. By the way, what exactly did you sense earlier? Alucard smirked wider. That would ruin the surprise. It's no fun if I just tell you. Let that be your motivation. Issei sighed and shook his head, but he smiled as well. If you say so. His expression became serious. I guess I'm off to the park then. That's the place where I usually meditate. Are you quite sure? Issei looked to his ancestor with a questioning glance. After all, that is the place where that woman killed you. Issei's eyes narrowed into slits and he tightened his fists. His eyes glowed with suppressed rage. The reminder of his near-death experience that was committed by the girl Yuma Mono had never ceased to leave Issei's memory. Alucard looked on in slight amused interest as he felt the spike in his descendant's kai. A few moments later, Issei settled down as his eyes dimmed and he loosened his fists. It won't happen again. Not this time. I absolutely cannot. Alucard smirked at the hybrid vampire's declaration. The boy never ceases to amaze me. Issei looked up and his expression was calm yet determined. I won't let that happen. I won't be weak. Issei's figure began to dim. He looked Alucard in the eyes. I'll talk to you later. Alucard spared him a nod and the hybrid vampire disappeared from his subconscious. Alucard smirked widely. Issei Haidu. You've far more potential. More than you know. At the park. Issei sat on the bench in a state of meditation. His eyes were closed in keen concentration. He inhaled and then exhaled, calming his breath. He concentrated the energy within him, attempting to increase his sensitivity. He suddenly felt a surge of overwhelming energy signals. He opened his eyes and they widened in shock. He could sense them. Issei grinned. Alright. I did it. 2 hours later within Issei's subconscious. Calm down. You act as though you discovered what water tastes like. Issei smiled wider, he was just so excited he learned how to increase his senses. Alucard just looked on in amusement. Issei's excitement was cut off as a questioning thought passed through his mind. Alucard. I need to ask you something. Alucard didn't respond, which pretty much meant as a signal to continue. You keep calling me your descendant. But I'm confused. How are we related? Alucard was quiet for a moment and then he looked down. Many years ago, I became infatuated with a woman by the name Wilhelmina Harker. I don't recall what was so special about her. Perhaps it was her beauty. In order for her to become my servant, I transferred portions of my blood into her system, binding herself to me. He smiled at the fond memory. Later on, a man named Abraham Van Helsing had managed to defeat me, freeing Mina from servitude. And because of that she was able to live throughout her life. However, because Helsing had not killed me, my essence within her bloodstream still existed. Eventually, she succumbed to becoming a vampire. However, she and her husband Jonathan had conceived a child. The boy by the name of Quincy Harker. Although the boy may have inherited a portion of my blood, it was not strong enough to overtake him. Eventually, as the Harker gene passed on from generation to generation, so did the portion of my blood increase its influence. And then it resurfaced within you, Issei. Issei was surprised was an understatement. So you mean I'm also a descendant of not just you, but Wilhelmina Harker? Alucard solemnly nodded. Issei collapsed on the floor in shock. My mother. Her maiden name was Harker. Alucard snorted. The gene must have not been strong enough to overwhelm her and transform her into a vampire. Issei continued to look down on the floor. I just can't believe it. Boredom would be an understatement to the feeling Alucard was currently experiencing. He was beyond exhausted with boredom. And how could he not feel it? Although he had the ability to exist wherever and however he chose to, he usually resided in Issei's subconscious. Yes, it was amusing to terrorize Issei when he least expected it, and it was entertaining, but all he ever did was mess with Issei mostly anyway. His expression was serious as he pondered. Perhaps I could find some other way to entertain myself, the vampire said. He hummed in contemplation, tapping his fingers on his throne. His eyes widened, and the smile on his face grew wider. Oh yes. I have something in mind. The smirk on his face grew incredibly wide, revealing his ever-shining sharp canine teeth. Akuo Academy. With crossed arms, Issei listened with indifference as his teacher droned on about the class subject. He knew all about the class subject anyway, so he didn't really have to pay attention to get the gist of it. He looked around the classroom and saw that most of the students were chatting about, not paying the teacher any mind. With his eyes narrowing, Issei heightened his senses, perceiving the feeling of his fellow classmates' auras. He smiled in confidence, happy that he had honed this ability. Knock knock. At the knock of the door, the teacher stopped her lesson and went to open the door. Opening it, a smile formed on her face. Class, we have a new student and she's from New England, so make sure to make her feel welcome. The class shot up in excitement, their interest piqued as they conversed about the subject of the new girl. Issei rose an eyebrow in slight curiosity. The new student, huh? This should be interesting. The figure walked into the class and stood in front of the teacher's desk. Issei almost dropped his pencil and his eyes widened. Wait a minute. Is that no? That can't be. It was a girl that appeared to be around Issei's age, possibly younger. She had deep black hair with piercing crimson eyes and was dressed in the traditional Kuo Academy's outfit for girls. She sent the class a smile that was bordering on utter wickedness. The class awed, with the boys commenting that the girl looked absolutely beautiful, with the girls commenting similar statements. But Issei had a much different reaction. As he stared in shock, he opened his mouth and since he wasn't thinking straight, he almost blurted his words out. Alu. He was cut off when his chair suddenly slipped out from under him, causing him to lean backwards and bump his head on another student's desk and fall down on the ground. The class gasped, their attention directed at the girl temporarily forgotten. Some of the students crowded around to check on Issei. Slightly grateful, but choosing to ignore the other students' words of concern, Issei rubbed the back of his head and stood up, ready to give his ancestor a piece of his mind, until he heard Alucard's voice through their mind link. Be silent, boy. You aren't going to ruin this for me. Issei looked on in shock. Ruin what for you? This isn't funny. What happened to your appearance? I know you can shape-shift and all, but why are you? Issei was cut off yet again when the chair suddenly lifted up and slammed onto his foot. Ouch. He jumped up and held his foot. He glared at the girl in front of the classroom, who was giving him a evil smirk. Not cool, Alucard. Not cool. The teacher gave Issei a stern look. Mr. Haidu, would you please sit down so our new student can introduce herself? Issei looked ready to protest, but then he saw the girl smirk smugly at him, and then the teacher's warning glare directed at him. Reluctantly, Issei sat down in his seat and gave the girl a moody glare. The teacher's stern gaze morphed into a kind smile as she looked at the girl in front of her. Now dear, why don't you introduce yourself in front of the class? The girl smiled sweetly and turned to the class. Hello everyone. My name is Alucard. You may call me Ani for short. It's nice to meet you, and I hope we can be friends. She flashed the class a sugary smile, with the class immediately taking a liking to her. Issei looked around the class with a shocked look on his face and glared at the female form of Alucard, which will now be referred to as Girlycard from this point on. Really? Alucard? It's just Draculina spelled backwards. You couldn't have come up with something original. Did I hear a request for the chair to attack you by repeatedly bashing you over the head? Issei pouted. No. Yeah, that's what I thought. Now be silent. The teacher pointed at the desk next to Issei. Ani, why don't you sit next to Issei, and since you're new here, after class is over, Issei can take you around the school for a tour. Issei spluttered with shock and indignation. Why me? The outrage was ignored as the teacher guided Alucard to the desk next to Issei. As the teacher resumed her lesson, Issei tried very hard to ignore his female ancestor, who was giving him a smug smirk. Issei scowled as he opened the mind link. Why are you out here? And how can everyone see you? I thought I was the only who could. Alucard shrugged and then smirked. I was bored. There's absolutely nothing to do in your subconscious besides watching you fail in life. Her smirk grew. And besides, it's fun toying with you. Sure, I could always annoy the hell out of you while I reside in your mind, but out here it's much more satisfying. And in response to your other two questions, so long as I will it, our mortals are able to see me. Issei gave her a blank look. You do realize that now that you're officially a student here, you're going to have to attend here regularly just like the rest of us. Alucard scoffed within the mind link. HMPH. You seem to be under the delusion that I actually give a shit whether or not I even consider coming to attend here. It doesn't concern me at all. It's worth it just to see you struggle. Issei sighed in annoyance and then widened his eyes when a thought came to him. How on earth did you get registered into the school? And more importantly, how were you able to sign up to this class? Alucard gave Issei another smirk, much to the latter's dismay. It's all a matter of mind manipulation and hypnosis. And the fact that I had told your school staff that you and I were distant cousins. Issei's eyes widened as he banged his desk with his fists and blurted out, you told them what? The class jumped in surprise and the teacher turned around to give Issei a stern glare. Issei, realizing he had shouted out his sentence, slid back into his seat in shame. It didn't help that Alucard was snickering in the mind link. Sorry about that. The teacher maintained her glare at Issei for a few seconds and then turned around, resuming her teaching. Making sure the teacher wasn't looking, Issei gave Alucard an questioning look. Why did you tell the staff we were cousins? Alucard shrugged again with a bored look on her face. I don't understand why you're so concerned. Technically we are related. Blood related to be exact. She looked over to Issei with a solemn expression on her face. You inherited the portion of my very blood from Wilhelmina Harker. Never forget that, Issei. Hearing the solemn yet prideful tone from his ancestor, Issei nodded in understanding. I know. I promise I won't. The two were silent for a moment. By the way, if you don't mind me asking, why did you take the form of a teenage girl? Alucard was silent, then she gave Issei an unreadable expression. There is never any meaning in the form that I take. Any particular form I take, it means nothing to me. The two kept their eye contact, with Issei breaking it by turning back to listen to the teacher. Alucard kept her gaze still on Issei, but eventually moved her now bored gaze to the window. 4 hours later, in which school is over. The doors opened, the student crowding it as they ran out in excitement. Next, Issei and Alucard walked out in no rush whatsoever. Issei had a content and calm look on his face, while Alucard's expression bordered on barely suppressed rage. Issei gave her a curious expression, and then he chuckled. I gotta say, I gotta give you props for not killing any of those guys. I was sure that as soon as one of them tried to flirt with you, you would have snapped all of their necks. His response was a snarl from his ancestor. As if I need your praise, foolish boy. Those damn pieces of shit. The female vampire tightened her fists as she kept her pace with Issei. Issei vainly suppressed his laughter at Alucard's misfortune. Now I remember why I stopped using this damn form. So does that mean you're not going to attend here anymore? He can embarrass me at home all he wants, but at school, no way. I heard that. Issei paled and chuckled nervously, with Alucard giving him a glare. And absolutely not. If I can endure getting blown up, getting shot and decapitation, then I can certainly tolerate the idiotic humans in this school. Issei really hated to disappoint her, but he settled for rolling his eyes instead. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Alucard gave him another glare. How utterly ridiculous. I've had enough tomfoolery for one day. But that being said, Alucard reverted back to Alucard. A glow surrounded the greatly irritated no-life king as he retired back to Issei's subconscious. Issei chuckled and he shook his head. Then he stopped, his eyes widening as he nearly evaded an attack from above. A blue light spear embedded into the spot Issei was in originally. Grunting in annoyance, Issei looked up to see a middle-aged looking man. He had short black hair and dark blue eyes and was clad in a pale violet trench coat over a white dress shirt with a matching ascot, black pants and shoes, and a black fedora. Issei's eyes narrowed as the man possessed black crow-like wings, the very same as Yuma Mono. Teleporting in front of the man, Issei floated in the air as his eyes darkened in annoyance. And just who the hell are you supposed to be? The man chuckled. How amusing. It seems I have caught a stray devil. No matter. I am the fallen angel by the name of Donaseek, also your eradicator. Issei sighed as his eyes lowered. Just when I thought this day couldn't get any worse. His eyes widened. Wait, fallen angel. Devil. What on earth is this guy talking about? What do you mean, devil? Donaseek smirked as he charged another blue light spear. Unfortunately you'll never get the chance to find out. Now die. He aimed his arm back and thrust it forward attempting to pierce Issei with the light spear. However, as soon as the light spear was about to come in contact with Issei, the hybrid vampire grabbed it, halting it in place. Donaseek gasped in bewilderment. What the? Issei gave him a cold look. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but clearly you were trying to kill me. That being said, I have no choice but to kill you in retaliation. Without warning, Issei tore the light spear from Donaseek's hands and thrust it forward, piercing through Donaseek's mouth. The fallen angel screamed in immense pain. He then snarled in fury as he tried to backhand Issei. Unfortunately for him, Issei easily caught his arm and Issei's subconscious. Watching from Issei's subconscious, Alucard smirked with pride. It seemed Issei had mastered some of his abilities quicker than he had anticipated. Alucard looked up and felt a mental reach. He allowed the passageway to his and Issei's mind link and opened it. Hey. Are you hungry? Alucard hummed in contemplation. Now that you mention it, I am quite famished. An arm sounds good about now. Yes. An arm should hit the spot. Outside Issei's subconscious. Eating his ancestor's request, Issei turned to look at Donaseek. Hey, I'm gonna need your arm. My friend's kind of starving and he hasn't eaten in a long time. So yeah. Donaseek raised an eyebrow. His confused expression then transformed into a horrified gaze and the next thing he knew, Issei swung his hand down and severed his arm clean off. The fallen angel let out a roaring scream of agony as he cradled the stump that was once his arm. As Issei held the fallen angel's torn arm, he looked Donaseek in the eye. His tone was calm as he spoke, as though he was talking about the weather. Just think. If you didn't attack me in the first place, you wouldn't be suffering through this pain now. Donaseek looked up in horror and agony. What are you? What in the hell are you? Issei held up his free arm and from his hand manifested a gun. A crimson aura began to envelop his body and as the aura increased, the gun started to glow with energy. Sayonara. Out of the gun, ruby energy barrages was released and as Donaseek could do nothing to stop it, the energy barrages engulfed the fallen angel, obliterating him. Where Donaseek previously floated, there was nothing left of him. Issei looked away and hovered down until reaching the ground. He sighed and then looked at the arm in slight disgust. He called out to Alucard. Hey, you can have this now. A shadow overlapped from Issei's own shadow and formed into Alucard. He greedily took the fallen angel's arm and tossed it into his mouth, chewing contently. He paused in his eating when he noticed Issei giving him a look of horrified disbelief. What? Issei continued to stare and then shook his head as he continued on his way home. Nothing. Nothing at all. Alucard, with an uncaring expression, shrugged and after swallowing the rest of the arm, followed his descendant on his pathway to his house. Issei looked to his ancestor. You're a pig, you know that right? Shut the hell up. Listen, I know you're a monster and all, Issei began. But the way you were eating that guy's arm was absolutely disgusting. Bite me? Was Alucard's witty comeback. Issei held up his hands in defense. I'm just saying. Alucard snorted in response. Issei shook his head as he and his ancestor continued on their way home. The hybrid vampire crossed his arms in thought. That guy I fought. He said that he was some type of creature called a fallen angel. Alucard smirked. Seems like you have quite a predicament. Issei nodded. Yeah. Looks like it. Next day. Issei walked out of the Kuo Academy doors and stopped to see Alucard in his female form Girlycard walking next to him with a smug grin on her face. Issei raised an eyebrow. What are you so happy about? You didn't send the guys who were trying to flirt with you to the hospital, did you? Or even worse. Girlycard smirked. Yes, those idiots are so battered and broken that they'll think twice about going near me again. But, aside from that, there is a much different reason. Issei blinked. And what is that exactly? Girlycard's smirk widened and she reverted back to Alucard. Before retiring to Issei's subconscious, he gave Issei a message. You'll find out eventually. I'll give you a hint. Sense. Issei blinked in confusion and raised an eyebrow. He heightened his senses and walked away from the school. As he almost walked on the bridge, he felt two surges of demonic power. He looked around and saw no presence at all. He narrowed his eyes. Someone or somebody was clearly watching him. He could feel them as though they were right next to him. Are they following me? Issei thought. So that must have been what Alucard meant. Clearing his throat, Issei crossed his arms. Hey, there's no point in concealing yourselves. I sensed both of you as soon as I left the school. As soon as he had said those words, he heard a breezing sound and Ria's gremmery and a girl with long black hair and a ponytail and violet eyes appeared in front of him. Riaz looked at Issei with a puzzled expression. You sensed us? Issei nodded. Your powers aren't really that hard to sense. Even if you conceal it, my senses are very perceptive. Ria's eyes widened in surprise, but then she smiled. Issei, I have something I must discuss with you. Would you mind coming with us so we can talk in private? Issei narrowed his eyes as he pondered his decision. He reached for his and Alucard's mind link. They don't appear to be dangerous. Issei began. But I'm still unsure. What do you think? He got a snort of amusement in response. Do what you wish. In any case, if they do appear to be dangerous, I'll just devour them if I get hungry again. They'll make a delicious meal. Issei rolled his eyes. We've got to talk about this eating habit of yours. HMPH. Worry about yourself. They're still waiting for your answer. Oh, and one more thing. Shut up. And with that, the vampire closed off the mind link. Issei sighed and turned to look at Riaz and her companion. He shrugged in assent. Sure, I've got nothing to do anyway. He nodded to the two. Lead the way. And so, Issei followed the two women to their location, which led them to a Victorian-styled house. His eyes widened in amazement, Issei whistled in appreciation. Nice house. Opening the doors, the trio walked into the house. Riaz turned to look at Issei. Excuse me for a few minutes. I'm going to go take a shower. Just wait here in the living room and I'll be out soon. Placing his hands in his blazer pockets, Issei nodded in assent, prompting Riaz to get ready. Issei looked around the room. Also, not a bad room. The room was wood-paneled with Victorian-style couches and chairs along the walls. The girl with long black hair and violet eyes turned to Issei and smiled, giggling in amusement. Yufufu. It's a pleasure to meet you, Issei. I'm Akeno Himejima. Same to you. His tone was polite yet short. He had no reason to trust these women, but nor did he have any reason to distrust them. He was just a little wary. Done with the introductions, Issei walked over to sit on the sofa and got comfortable. As he looked around the room, he gained a serious expression and closed his eyes as he thought. 20 minutes later. Riaz emerged from the bathroom, clad in her Kuo Academy uniform. She walked over to the sofa opposite Issei, sat down, and smiled at the hybrid vampire. Akeno stood next to Riaz, with a smile on her face. Okay, Issei. I will cut right to the chase. We are devils. Issei cut her off. Yes. I'm aware. Riaz and Akeno's eyes widened in surprise. I could sense the particular type of energy you two had. It's different from that Donaseek guy. The girl's eyes widened even further. Riaz was the one to speak. Different? How so? Issei looked at her for a moment and crossed his arms. The energy he possessed, it was off. Like it was extremely lacking purity. He kept calling himself a fallen angel. Riaz blinked and then her eyes shined with understanding. Yes, that does sound like that type. You see, Issei. There are 3 factions who have resided since the ancient times. First are the angels, then fallen angels, and then lastly devils. Issei heard Alucard hum in interest. Interesting. Ourselves, as devils, have been in battle with the fallen angels for many centuries. We've been fighting over the property of the underworld, or hell, as it's called in the world of humans. The underworld is separated into 2 realms, one for devils and one for fallen angels. The devil forms a pact with humans, and as a result, they receive their sacrifices, allowing the reborn devil to increase their strength. The fallen angels, as opposed to us, take advantage of humans to destroy the devils. Then it's the angels who destroy their other counterparts, on God's orders, creating the 3 forces. As he processed a ton of information, Issei clasped his hands together under his chin. So, what's the purpose of you guys residing in this building? Riaz smiled. This building is where we devils gather for our activities. It's sort of a disguise for the humans to perceive. Issei nodded in understanding. Riaz then crossed her legs. Does the name Yuma Amano ring a bell? At the mention of the name of that accursed woman, Issei's eyes glowed a bright crimson color. In anger, he released an enormous surge of Kai, his aura flaring. The ground started to shake in tremors. The 2 devils tried to balance themselves as they gripped the sofa. Ria's eyes widened with shock. What power? Akeno had different thoughts. Ara. Such an angry little cowhide. Gritting his teeth in raw fury, Issei took deep breaths as he tried to calm himself. After a few moments, his aura disappeared and his glowing crimson eyes dimmed. The hybrid vampire sighed and looked at Riaz with calm yet fierce eyes. Akeno broke the tense silence. Ifufu. Well, it looks like it does ring a bell. Riaz was desperately trying to keep her composure as she looked at Issei. Issei spoke next with a cold voice, now serious more than ever. What about her? Riaz gulped, but then she regained her composure. I assume that now you know what a fallen angel is, you can tell that Amano was one. Issei nodded slowly, both of his eyes glowering darkly. This fallen angel had come in contact with a certain goal. To kill you. Issei narrowed his eyes as a memory remnant came to him. Flashback. What a shame. You were a threat to us, so we had to get rid of you early on. If you want to hold a grudge, then despise the god who put the sacred gear inside you. End of flashback. Issei's eyes twitched, but he calmed himself. Before she flew away, she mentioned something called a sacred gear. Riaz nodded. The sacred gear is an object with immense capabilities that are endowed to special humans. There are some sacred gears that are threat to us devils and fallen angels. She looked Issei in the eye. Now, Issei. Raise your hand. Issei rose a cool eyebrow, but he complied and lifted his left arm. Now close your eyes and imagine the strongest thing that comes to mind. Issei already had that subject in his mind. Alright. Lower your arm and then stand up. Then imagine it and imagine that thing in a pose where it looks the strongest. And then mimic the pose of that thing, okay? Do not hold back. But the person said in his mind, Issei shot both of his arms forward, with his arms appearing as though they were holding guns. Now open your eyes. There was a flash, and when Issei opened his eyes, the light took a form and covered his left arm. The light dimmed, and there laid upon Issei's arm was a blood-red gauntlet. The part of the gauntlet that covered the back of his hand had a jewel-like object enclosed in it. Issei's eyes widened in shock, and he heard a chuckle of amusement from his subconscious. Well done. Bravo, my descendant. Issei blinked in shock. What? Wait, did you know about this? He got another chuckle in response. There is so much power within you, Issei. There is another soul that resides inside you. He and I will both converse with you in due time. And then the mind link was cut off. Riaz smiled. That is your sacred gear. And it's yours. Once it appears, you can use it with your own will. Issei continued to stare in astonishment and his thoughts was cut off by Riaz. Issei. How did you survive? Issei narrowed his eyes and he was about to speak until a voice cut him off. His survival was caused by me. The trio turned around to see a tall man with black hair and blood-red eyes. He was clad in a charcoal suit, white gloves with seal-like symbols on them, leather riding boots, and a full-length red frock overcoat with a cape. He wore a red hat with a wide floppy brim and a pair of circular, heavily tinted wire-framed orange sunglasses with goggle sidings. Riaz and Akeno jumped up in surprise. Such monstrous energy. Ara. What a suffocating feeling. Alucard smirked at the two devils' reaction and turned to Issei, who raised an eyebrow. Wasn't expecting you to emerge just like that, Alucard. The vampire's smirk widened. What can I say? Expect the unexpected. Issei shook his head and turned to Riaz and Akeno, who stared in shock at the no-life king. Alucard explained Issei's survival to the two devils. When the boy was impaled by that despicable fallen angel's light spear, the blood that was released from his body allowed me to emerge. While he was at the brink of death, I merged my essence with him, changing him into a vampire. The two devils' eyes bugged out in absolute shock. A vampire? They said simultaneously. Alucard chuckled. Riaz gulped. The vampire's power was absolutely enormous. It far surpassed her brother's power, and it was most likely, dare she think it, near the infinite dragon god's power. And the fact that he had merged his essence and power with Issei's blood, that meant Issei was immensely powerful as well. For a vampire, you look really powerful. Alucard smirked. You would be correct, however, I am no mere vampire. Riaz felt inclined to believe him and turned to the, thankfully, saner Issei. Then, she had an idea. With someone as powerful as Issei on her side, he would be a great ally. Issei. Do you know what a peerage is? Issei rose an eyebrow and shook his head. Riaz peered down to her table. On the table laid 15 chess pieces. Riaz picked one up and showed it to the hybrid vampire. Issei. This is called an evil piece. The evil pieces were created by Ajuka Beelzebub in order to help repopulate the devil population after the Great War. During that war, numerous devils have been extinct. There are 15 pieces in all, and top-tier devils receive them in order to increase their ranks, by which beings are reborn as devils. Issei listened with great seriousness, as did Alucard, though his expression seemed to appear as amusement more than anything. Riaz continued. As I mentioned earlier, there are 15 pieces in all. Issei narrowed his eyes. If it's similar to chess, the same rules apply. That means there can only be one queen, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, 2 knights, and 8 pawns. Riaz nodded to his answer. That's correct. For myself, I have a queen, one knight and one rook. Issei looked Riaz in the eye. Why are you telling me all this? Riaz smiled with a cryptic air about her. I would you like for you to join my peerage? Issei's eyes widened. What? Join her peerage? His eyes narrowed. Why would you want me on your peerage? Riaz blinked in confusion, expecting a different reaction from the hybrid vampire, but she regained her composure. I believe you will be a great ally to be on my side and a good friend. A vampire that possesses so much power and along with an elder vampire would give me a great advantage for my peerage. Issei stared at the crimson-haired devil with an unreadable expression on his face. Numerous thoughts were going through his head. I don't know, the young man said quietly. He looked back up. I need time to think. Riaz blinked again in surprise, but then she nodded. Perhaps I was a bit too fast. After all, he just found out about his sacred gear. Alright, Issei. She said. Well, please let us know of your decision. Issei nodded and got ready to walk out of the door, with Alucard walking behind him. He turned around to look at the two devils. Thank you both. It was good meeting you. And with that, he walked out. Riaz sighed softly and put her hand under her chin. I hope he makes his decision. Akeno smiled. I'm sure he'll consider, Riaz. At the street near Issei's house. Issei with his sacred gear deactivated had his hands in his pockets with a musing expression. As Alucard walked beside him, the vampire looked down at him, his descendant. Something troubling you? Issei looked up at his ancestor and then he sighed. It's just so weird. First I find out about devils, fallen angels and angels, then I find out the reason I was almost killed was because possessed a sacred gear and now a devil wants me to join her peerage. Alucard chuckled in great amusement. Seems once again, you have quite a predicament to handle. Issei sighed and rubbed his forehead. Yeah. Finished with their conversation, Alucard retired into Issei's subconscious. Suddenly, there was sharp wind-like sound of a spear and Issei, with his senses going overboard, sidestepped just in time to avoid a golden light spear. Balancing himself on his new standing spot, Issei narrowed his eyes as the light spear disintegrated into the ground. Damn, I hate those things. He said with disgust. He looked up and saw a female figure. A tall, buxom woman with navy blue hair and brown eyes appeared from the sky. She was clad in a violet trench coat-like top, a matching miniskirt, and black-heeled shoes. A gold necklace was placed around her neck. Issei's eyes darkened. Another fallen angel. The woman smirked. Well. I'm quite impressed. My name is Kalwerner. You escaped from my attack just by moving to the side. Her voice was arrogant, but it had an enticing air about it. Bernal was supposed to kill you, but it seemed that even she failed to do so. Her gaze darkened. And you are also the one that destroyed Donasik. Issei's eyes twitched in irritation. This was really not his night. You fallen angels are really annoying. Scoffing at the hybrid vampire's words, Kalwerner created another light spear, unfurled her black wings and charged towards Issei, with the intention of puncturing him with her light spear. Issei narrowed his eyes and he held out his hand. The fallen angel's eyes widened, but before she could react, Issei grabbed the light spear, halting it from piercing him. Kalwerner gasped in shock as the light spear immediately disintegrated in Issei's hand. The fallen angel's expression showed fear when she looked into Issei's eyes. His eyes were glowing crimson red. Issei gripped the fallen angel's arm and he slowly, very slowly, began to twist it. Gasping at the immense pain, Kalwerner screamed until she heard a snap. Shuddering at the pain, she looked to see Issei had dislocated her arm. Her eyes wide with shock and newfound fear, Kalwerner fluttered her wings, trying to fly away. She would have succeeded had Issei not grabbed both of her wings. The fallen angel shrieked in pain and she looked behind him with pleading brown eyes. Please, don't do this. Issei glared coldly at her. His eyes glowed crimson again, but then suddenly Kalwerner's brown eyes morphed to a crimson color. She appeared to be in a trance, her face now expressionless. Issei narrowed his eyes and he said only one word. Collapse. Kalwerner's eyes glowed brighter and then she fainted on the ground, with Issei still holding her wings tightly. The hybrid vampire scowled in suppressed irritation and he carried the fallen angel on his back. Sighing in annoyance, he continued on his pathway to his house. Well, this is going to be an interesting night. Opening the door to his house, Issei dragged the fallen angel known as Kalwerner and threw her onto his couch. Narrowing his eyes, Issei crossed his arms and walked over to her. He tapped Kalwerner on the head and her golden eyes fluttered until they shot open at the sight of Issei. Ahhh. Kalwerner jumped in fright as she saw the one who had captured her. She looked around frantically, trying to decipher where she was. I have some questions for you, fallen angel. Issei began. Kalwerner stiffened as she looked into Issei's eyes and the young man pointed to her. And you're going to answer them? Alwerner narrowed her eyes darkly. If you think I'm going to betray my comrades and tell you everything, you're sadly mistaken. She was cut off when she was suddenly lifted up into the air and thrown to the wall. Issei's eyes narrowed darkly and he slowly walked over to her. Alwerner's eyes widened with shock and she tensed as she realized she couldn't move her body. Issei stopped in front of her, crossing his arms. You seem to be under the impression that I was asking you. I wasn't. There was a reason I brought you here and the reason was for you to answer a couple of questions. Alwerner gasped repeatedly and she was finding it hard to breathe. Her throat started to constrict on itself and she struggled. She started to nod her head, trying to ensure herself that her life would be saved if she told Issei. Seeing her move her head, Issei deactivated his telekinesis, allowing Alwerner to drop onto the floor, with her hand rubbing her throat in order to soothe it. Issei scoffed and walked over to his couch. Alright, my first question. Alwerner looked up at Issei with a scowl. Where is Renelle now? Alwerner stiffened and she looked away. Issei narrowed his eyes. Where is she? He firmly asked. The fallen angel hesitated, but eventually she relented. She's at a church. She is about to sacrifice another human with a sacred gear. Issei's eyes widened. Another one? His eyes then narrowed, his crimson eyes glowing. She's just not satisfied with one, is she? Crossing his arms, Issei turned his attention back to Alwerner. Is there anyone else with her? Alwerner narrowed her eyes. Breed Selzen, a priest of sorts, an exorcist. And Issei's subconscious. Alucard rested as he listened to his descendant's interrogation involving the fallen angel. To be frank, Alucard would have just teared the fallen angel to shreds after absorbing her memories. But he settled with listening to the interrogation. However, he woke up with a start as he heard the fallen angel say something oddly familiar. The priest of sorts, an exorcist. Alucard's eyes widened in shock and then he smiled. He started to snicker. His snickering turned into a chuckle and then it blew out into a full-blown maniacal laughter. Hey ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Marveled by what the fallen angel had just revealed, Alucard straightened himself and an aura formed around him before he disappeared into a pool of shadows. Outside of Issei's subconscious. Issei gained a thoughtful look in his eyes and was about to ask another question until he felt a familiar presence beginning to rise. He turned around to see his ancestor. Alucard. Alucard chuckled and turned to look at the even more frightened fallen angel. What on earth is this power? It's so frightening. Issei rose an eyebrow at the appearance of his ancestor, but then he shrugged and let it go. Which church is it? Alwerner happily turned her direction back to Issei, already frightened of Alucard's monstrous aura and his dangerous presence. It's the abandoned church. Issei nodded. Alwerner continued. The one nearby by the woods with the trees. Alright, I remember. I've passed by it before. He turned over to look at Alucard. You gonna come with? Alucard smirked. Yes, I believe I will. This priest that this fallen angel mentioned interests me greatly. But first. The shadow began to form around Alucard and then the shadow formed into an aura that manifested into a young girl. She had black hair and malevolent crimson eyes. She wore a white hat made of fur, a white suit with a long coat and possessed a Tommy gun. Her crimson eyes glowed as she sent a smirk to the shocked Alwerner. Issei rose an eyebrow placing his hands in his pockets. Alucard. Both Alucard and his female counterpart turned to look at Issei with a look of annoyance and indignation, respectively. What the hell did you just say? Demanded the no-life king. Issei held his hands up in defense. What? When you're in this form, you look like a girl. It's a pretty catchy name when you think about it. Alucard's glare darkened and Alucard gave Issei a dark glare. Shut the hell up. Issei promptly kept quiet and he turned to look at Alucard. Any particular reason you manifested your alternate form here? Alucard, still annoyed by Issei's ridiculous nickname for his female form, straightened himself. I am going to stay here and keep watch of this fallen angel. This form of mine will accompany you on your way to the church. Issei tilted his head and turned to look at Alucard, who still had that scowl on her face. I thought you were coming with me, though. Alucard rolled his eyes. Please, don't be so sentimental. If you would like to be relieved and feel technical about it, this form is still me, albeit in a variant form. So I am still following you. Whatever this form sees, I will see as well. Issei stood still for a moment and then he shrugged. Alright, sure, what the hell. He turned to look at Alucard. Are you ready? Alucard smirked widely and she readied her Tommy gun. And? So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.